surveys that the council who votes the questions that are going to be on the survey, but more importantly, the cost of the survey, nobody knows, and it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's a big secret, but the residents don't know how much the survey cost, how much, who got the survey, who didn't get the survey. I mean, I've been living here 8 years, and I've never gotten a survey in the mail in 8 years. But anyway, and my second comment was, this week in my Palm Coast utility bill, I got this beautiful color piece of paper indicating that there were going to be some changes on this color brochure sent home to me, because God only knows how much that cost. And again, we the residents don't know about the cost of this printing, especially in color. You could have just easily put it into the mayor's comments, and that would have been the end of it. So that's my comments for today.
Thank you for your comments. Is there another member of the public that would like to address City Council at this time? Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, all council. My name is Peter Poluvig. I am the resident of Palm Coast. I have one bigger issue since 5 years, and that I brought to the previous mayor, Mrs. Holland, regarding about the tennis. I'm very strongly involved because with the top 10 tennis player in the world, including the one what we have from our village, Rayleigh Opelka. We have some opportunity what is not even city like Chicago has, but we treating our tennis here like the 5 tires, or I don't know what is the example. What I like complain, first of all, a new trainer was hired to this city, and this person is like blessing for us. This is the person who is legend. He is the previous trainer for Serena and Venus Williams. That is luck, huge luck for us. But this person has tied up hands. I'm basic, everyday contact with him. The problem is the young people, including my son, who is the top second in Florida. We have other. I was forced to move my son to Europe, get trainers, because Mr. George, he is absolutely, he don't have chance to hire a trainer, because person who is in HR looking for a CV, he doesn't have any idea, any clue what is the trainer for tennis has to do. I understand, because that person at HR, he is prepared to see CV for ordinary person for the city, not for the professional trainer. Many of them, I can brought at least 2 or 3. One is from the Patrick Mortigo, very, very noble schools in Europe. I can brought them here. I talk to them, but when they go through, I used to work for NASA in Cape Canaveral. Believe me, the process of recruiting here, it is 10 times complicated like to get to place in NASA. It is any chance the city can do something and change the, first of all, untie the hands for Mr. George, and second, just make something to the process to hire, because George is overall. He cannot run 3, 4 things. I was have pleasure to meet Mrs. Caddy and brought this, to attention. I spoke with Mr. Mayor, and we have a meeting with George Opelka. I like do something, because if not, believe me or not, year or 2, the place, Palm Coast, even with the new facility, will be forget, and the tennis world. We have already bad experience 5 years ago when the USTA was taking out our, let's say, competition from Palm Coast. Please wake up, get the cold shower, and change something for this direction. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any other members of the public that would like to address City Council at this time? Seeing no one come forward, I will close this section of public comment. City Manager, any comment?
Mr. McDonald will get you some figures about cost. That's what I heard from that comment. And then also, my understanding is that the other gentleman has been coordinating with our staff and you, Mayor, so we'll work through those channels to make sure we understand his concerns.
And the only other thing I would add to that is, as we, the timing is excellent. As we move into our SAP process today, perhaps additional conversation regarding the division between City Council and staff regarding vision versus operation might be a fruitful discussion. Helpful, because it's hard to grasp, and I would like the public, as well as City Council, to understand it as clearly as possible.
Excellent point. Thank you, Mayor.
Very good. Very good. Well, with that, can I get a consensus that we will start with our economic forecast from a senior professional economist to start the day? That will be a change in the agenda, but there was a timing issue. It really should come first as our introduction. So are we all good with that? Very good. Then, Mr. DiLorenzo, would you make the appropriate introductions?
Sure. Good morning, Mayor, City Council, Jason DiLorenzo. Today we have joining us once again Dr. Lowe from the University of North Florida. And I'm going to get his presentation here for you. Dr. Lowe, would you prefer to sit? Dr. Lowe has a basketball.
Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council members. Good morning, and I'm very happy to be me on the agenda this early in the but I mean your work helped prosper the region, so which is very important too.
Please feel comfortable to sit down, and I'm going to ask you to use your microphone as well, just to make sure that anyone that's listening virtually can hear you clearly.
Okay.
If that's comfortable, and that'd be fine. Good.
All right, so today I'm going to provide a very economic briefing for, I know the focus is going to be the Palm Coast area, but sometimes the data may not necessarily be available. I'm trying to find the data as close to the Palm Coast as possible. All right, so my presentation today is going to be focusing on three areas. I'm gonna comment on labor market, and then goods and services market, as well as the overall economic outlook from the perspective of consumer and business sentiment. So first on the labor market, so here is a quick glimpse at the labor market in Florida overall. And we know that the Florida economy has rebounded very quickly, and I gave a lot of details in my presentation last year. And as you can see that, just very quickly, because you're gonna see some of this set up in the graph a lot. So the gray area basically indicate recession, and the most recent recession as indicated with that fairly thin gray line to the right, that is the most current COVID recession. So right now we are 3 years out of it. All right, and as you can see that in terms of real GDP, Florida's real GDP has really rebounded and basically is now on track, back on track to where it was supposed to be had there been no pandemic recession. And in addition, I think we can see that the labor force has also grown back to where it should have been. And if you look at the participation, labor force participation, and that is one of the factors why our labor force has back on track, because the labor force participation has really gone back to the level before the pandemic, while the nation still trail behind a little bit. And of course, we also benefit from the favorable demographic trend in terms of people moving from other states to Florida. So we really have a net inflow of population, and those really help our local economy. right? And the unemployment rate in the nation is near a historical low. And as you can see in the red trend, that's the national unemployment rate, which is now close to 2.7%, which is really, really low. And in Florida, that rate is even better. It's close to 2.5%. All right, of course, we can drill down a little bit further. When we have the data on the Palm Coast and Flagler County, or in terms of the MSA. So we know that Palm Coast is actually located in this Daytona Beach, and Ormond Beach MSA. So in this chart on the left, where I'm actually having 3 trends showing the unemployment rate in these 3 different granularity. So the orange is Flagler County, while Palm Coast is in blue. You can't quite see the blue lines because it's very closely related to the Flagler County data. So maybe with only 2 months, otherwise it's actually falling, hiding behind that orange line. And the gray line indicates the unemployment rate in the MSA. And overall, the unemployment rate in the region in this area is hovering around 3%, which is very good. So by the time that this slide was made, the latest data for February was not released, but later when I checked it, I think that in the February data, the unemployment rate stayed around 3%, which again is very good. However, the thing in this time, what we need to focus during this era is really, we understand that the Federal Reserve Bank is trying to raise the interest rate to tame the demand increase, right? So to tame the economy, so to prevent it from overheating, bring the inflation down. And we also heard about a lot of concern that this is, could potentially lead to, hopefully in the best case scenario, a soft landing. Of course, worst case scenario, that would be inducing a recession. So of course, at this time, we are really focusing on trying to monitor the economy to see whether there's any sign of that turning point. So if you look at the February unemployment rate at 3%, so is that better or worse? That's basically no change, right? But in terms of the typical year, from January to February, usually the unemployment rate will drop a little bit. So with the unemployment rate staying at 3%, that's actually a little bit worse than what we would hope. All right, and if we look at the hourly earnings by sector in the state, which is presented in the chart on the right, and this is based on the various sectors, and we can see that in terms of the 12-month trend, overall it's rising, which we understand because all the employers need to raise the wage rate in order to compete for workers, which is in a lot of shortage in the last year. But if you look closely to the end of that trend, we want to see whether there is a turning point. So we see that there are some fluctuation near the end, and some of them may be going up, some of them may be going down. So in the last column, I zoom in 3 months change, so which will be from November to January. And we can see that in terms of manufacturing sectors, which is the second one from the top, and construction and financial activity, services or leisure and hospitality, those sectors all see a slight dip in the last month. All right, and this may not necessarily mean anything. We know economic measures fluctuate all the time, but what's important is that we need to monitor all the measures all the time to make sure that we are not missing that turning point. This is especially important for any planning activity. All right, and we can drill down to the MSA level, and we can look at the employment trend. So in this chart, let's focus on only the 3 months. We know that the 12 month has some consistent rising in trend, which is pretty much a theme in the past. But let's look at the 3 month data. So in the second column, we have the 3 months data without the seasonal adjustment. I will explain what that means. We do see a lot of drop in the past month or the last 2 months in various sectors, but we don't necessarily have to worry because we have to understand, again, from January, a drop in employment typically expected because a lot of people take this out to change jobs. So if we take that into account by doing a seasonal adjustment, I'm using the state level seasonal indexes to make this adjustment. And then we can see that once we take into account those typical fluctuations between December to January, and what happened to those measures in employment. And the good news is that most of them continue to rise. However, there are several sectors that I'm highlighting in blue that still show a declining change in the last month, which include in mining, logging, and construction, trade, transportation, and utility, retail trade, transportation, warehousing, and utility, as well as in financial activities. So those were the sectors that we continue to monitor. All right, now let me switch to the goods and services market. The focus there usually is the inflation rate. So we can look at this from the consumer perspective as well as from producer's perspective. So if we look at it from consumer's perspective, we focus on the CPI, Consumer Price Index. So my last presentation this time last year was indicated by that dotted line in the middle. That's and all the chart to the left of it is what I presented last time. At that time, I normalized all the data to the pre-pandemic level to 100%. So you see that all the lines starting at the same point, 100. And then by doing that, I wanted to show what is the relative change in the CPI relative to the pre-pandemic level. And our conclusion at that time is that, well, all of them were rising, from somewhere between 8 to 10%, and in some cases, especially in energy, which we know is volatile, very volatile, and there is a significant change relative to all the other categories. All right, and so maybe I should indicate which line is for what. All right, so if you look at that, there are 4 colored trend, and the second one from the bottom in blue, that actually for all the items in the basket. However, if we oftentimes need to decompose this because some of the items typically don't change a lot. Some of them actually is pretty much volatile. So usually we consider energy and food prices being more volatile than all the other components. So you see, if we look at the time of my last presentation, the highest one is purple. That one is the CPI for energy. And following that will be the price for food in green. And then below that, that's the overall CPI. And then the one below that in red, that is all the items minus energy and food, right? So those were the core CPI. So all of them were rising. Now, my last presentation, which is the last year, and you can see that the price continued to go up, okay? And so if I renormalize all the data to this time last year, February 2022, and then let's see what happened in the past year up until now. The price continued to rise, although the energy price, there's a lot of fluctuation, but fortunately at this time of the year, currently the price is now lower than most of the other items. But the food price is really high. So if you look at in the past 12 months, so the index has jumped from 100 to 100, close to 109 or 110. That is equivalent to a 10% increase annually. So it's really high for food. While the other items still have around 6% increase. Just so you know that usually Federal Reserve Bank want to keep the inflation rate around 2%. That's their target range. So this is certainly way higher, which is why we pretty much are convinced that Federal Reserve Bank will continue to raise the interest rate to bring that level down to the target area. All right, please feel free to ask any question anytime. I know I keep going, but sometimes I may not have explained everything clearly. All right, and when we look at the month-over-month change, and we can see that certainly the most fluctuating one is, again, the energy price. All the other ones seem to be converging a little bit, till the current point. But if you look at the scale on the right, you can see that overall CPI still hovering around month-to-month basis. So annualized percent, and that would be equivalent to a 4.5% annual inflation rate, which again is too high. Okay, so what would be the level that Federal Reserve Bank would consider in terms of a month-to-month change that correspond to a 2% target inflation? Well, the answer is 0.16 or 0.17%. So right now we are almost twice as high as that. Okay, so again, this chart is only to convince us that Federal Reserve Bank will continue to raise interest rate. All right, now switch to the producer's perspective. We look at producer price index. I'm normalizing that data at February of 2022, again, my last presentation. So it seems like the good news is that a lot of those data are trending down in terms of last year overall. So most of them falling behind 100. If you look at the scale to the right, most of the data fall below 100, with only two exceptions. And I think those purple and teal color lines, those indicate the sea transportation and glass materials. So the other items such as plastic, building materials, steel and irons, or freight and trucking, chemicals, those prices all went down. Although some of them seem to be on the rising trend, but they haven't really been as high as last year. So that's fairly good news. We know that that's an indication that the consumer price may eventually go down because it trickled down from producers to consumers. All right, and this is a brand new data that I wasn't able to provide before, but this year I am creating a new survey, which is called Jacksonville Economic Monitoring Survey. It's really focusing on the Jacksonville area, but since we are pretty close, we're in the vicinity area, so hopefully whatever we find in the Jacksonville area can provide some indication to what you will be experiencing in Palm Coast. So in this survey, I basically survey local businesses in Jacksonville area. I'm trying to ask them, comparing to a month ago, what are you experiencing the economic activity in your business in terms of several areas such as output, new orders, new export orders, backlogs of goods inventory, output price, average input price, and suppliers' delivery times, etc. And I'm computing something called Purchasing Manager Index. This is the kind of measure that several institutions will produce for the entire U.S. or sometimes a global market. Usually this is not available at the local area, but I'm starting to do that for the Jacksonville area. And February is the first month I did that, which is last month. The March survey is ongoing at this point. So from the February data, we saw that new orders is down, meaning that the purchasing managers, in terms of new orders, purchasing manager find that measure is lower than the previous month. So new orders is down, backlogs of works is down, suppliers' delivery time is down, and that could be a good news because it means that the supply chain problems is gradually easing. So it takes shorter amount of time for the goods to be delivered. But new orders being down, backlogs of work being down, this is an indication of softening in demand. And suppliers' delivery time is falling, like I said, which reflect the supply chain pressure easing, which is a good piece of information. But overall, if we compute something called a headline PMI index, it's indicating that economy is contracting in the last month, right? And which could indicate that small turning point we are looking at. We just don't know whether it's going to end up with a soft landing or crash. So hopefully the former. All right, and so now let's take a quick look at the outlook in terms of consumer and business sentiment. So University of Florida, they have a Bureau of Economic and Business Research which publish consumer sentiment index that try to capture how consumers feel about the current economy and also the economy moving forward. So the good news is that consumers remain optimistic about the current economy. But if you look at the detailed data, it seems like a lot of those optimism come from much improved personal financial situation. So in terms of business perspective, according to my Jacksonville Economic Monitoring Survey, all the manufacturers surveyed in February expressed a mixed sentiment toward the current marketplace. Some of them feel pretty optimistic, feel that the economy is pretty stable, demand is stable, but some others start to see some of the softening sign. In terms of the 12-month overlook, they overall express a cautious optimism about the future demand. So that's what I'm getting from the data. Overall outlook is still good, but it seems like there are small signs here and there showing that the economy may be softening. Maybe we are close to the soft landing.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
I think it's tremendous that you're starting to collect this data now at the localized level. Is this does it align with what we're seeing as a national average, or are we trending a little bit, I don't want to say of a softer landing than some other places in the country, or does this kind of also follow the national average?
This is pretty consistent with the PMI published at the national level by S&P Global, as well as by the IHM, or ISM, which is Institute for Supply Management. So they publish national data on that. And I compare my data to what they published in the same month, and it's pretty consistent. So nationwide, we also see a softening in demand.
I have a question too. You talk about consumer optimism, and you mentioned that people are starting to feel more comfortable because they have an increase in the money they have. Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
Or are they sending themselves into debt with their credit cards? Because my understanding of savings has really declined in this country. The people aren't saving. They're going more and more in debt. I don't see how that's optimistic. It almost seems like a spiral down to the ground, to a crash.
Right. So
Am I missing something with that?
That is certainly a very good point. So let's differentiate between two things. One is how they feel, because how they feel can help explain their future behavior in terms of spending. If they feel good about it, whether it's realistic optimism or not, as long as their optimism contribute to their continuous spending, that's what we will see in economic performance data. But what the council member, there is really a gap between their optimism and the reality. Maybe
Okay.
they are overspending, maybe they are overspending, maybe they are in a lot of debt, or maybe because they truly feel that they are getting a lot of help from the federal government, considering we have all the CARES Act, we have the American
Or
Rescue
maybe they're
Plan.
just on a drunken spending spree.
Right.
To
so
be
it-
honest with you, I mean, and I gotta say, a lot of folks I talk to in this community aren't very optimistic about the economy. They feel over by the prices of everything from food to fuel. They could get permission to have chickens in their backyard who could lay eggs for them. And they were serious. So I don't see much optimism here. I see a lot of maybe folks putting themselves into a bad situation, but optimism, I don't see much optimism. And I'm glad that what you're talking a little bit about reality now, because we can look at numbers and say, oh, this is up and this is nice, but when you get to the reality, as you just mentioned, I think it might be a little bit different story. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with council members' comment, because I think that a lot of times consumers, their optimism is really disengaged from the reality, and they are in a lot of debt. They didn't know until it hit them a couple of months or a year later.
Yeah.
But according to the data, I'll comment on how that reconcile with what we see in the data to what we just discussed. The data, of course, the most recently available data is in February, which is like a month lag. And two, what the UF data is capturing is the average consumer sentiment. So certainly sometimes we do hear, we understand that the average consumer sentiment is somewhere in the middle, right? There are certainly some people feel more optimistic, and some people feel less. So this is only capturing the average. But I definitely agree with your comments.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and so if we summarize the current economy and in terms of labor market, my data today show that we have a resilient job growth and continued low unemployment rate. And we do expect to see some market correction in some areas, as we saw some sectors already see a declining wage rate as well as declining employment, in particular in the goods producing sector and financial services. For goods and services market, my comment is inflation rate has peaked but remain high. By peaking inflation rate, I mean that the highest inflation rate is behind us. Now we are trying to bring it down. It's still too high. So we do expect the interest rate hike to continue. And some of the business survey do show signs of softening demand. Consumer and business sentiment overall shows we have a rising consumer confidence, whether that's realistic or not. And we have mixed business sentiment in terms of the economic outlook. So I'm usually very reluctant in making forecasts on economic condition because a lot of things are changing and we are really in an uncharted territory because if you look back in the U.S. economic history, we haven't been in such a strange combination of situation where you have overheating, where you have a super high inflation rate and Federal Reserve Bank has been doing a lot of interest rate hike and still failed to bring it down quickly. But at the same time, labor market performance is so strong. So this is a very weird scenario, and I don't know how to properly predict what's going forward, so I'm trying to be conservative. I do know that inflation rate remains a concern, and which will motivate further interest rate hike by the Fed. And I do know that the interest rate hike will eventually induce a modest or short recession in the nation. However, when we look at the contrast of Florida data to the national data, Florida usually is doing better than the nation as a whole. So if the nation is going through a mild and short recession, Florida probably will see a much milder one. All right, so that's all I have for today.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. I have a couple of questions, and then I'm sure we all have questions. Could you remind me of the name of our MSA and what an MSA is?
Yes, it's Daytona Beach, and Ormond Beach MSA.
So Daytona Beach, or is there something missing from there?
Ormond Beach.
Okay. What is Palm Coast's ranking in that MSA?
I don't have a ranking of the different neighborhoods
Okay.
within the MSA.
All right. I would ask you, it's my understanding that Palm Coast ranks #1 in our MSA now.
I second that.
I'm sure that's the case.
Okay. I guess my question then going forward is, will you update your slide for the future and let us know when that actually becomes official?
Okay, I will try to find
And
that
the reason I poke fun at that, it is important because from an economic standpoint, ranking #1 in your MSA, I assume, could have some tremendous economic benefits in the long term. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, I agree.
Very good. Next is, you compared us in your data with Jacksonville, which I understand, that's your orientation, your ground zero. Would you, historically, the city of Palm Coast has been attached, at least through media and other markets, to the Orlando market. In your judgment as an economist, would you feel that we more rightfully belong closer and dearer to the Jacksonville marketplace, based on what you know about Palm Coast? Are we more similar to the Orlando marketplace?
I don't think I know Palm Coast well enough to know where I mean, if you look at geographically, it's really in the middle of the two, in between the two. So, but if we look at the Orlando areas, because its economy is much bigger than Jacksonville, so I suppose it's easier to find the linkage between that, a mass of that economy linking to the Palm Coast area. Jacksonville, although we are growing very rapidly, but really going beyond Duval and then St. Johns County, and then it seemed like the economic activity has a drop, which created a hole between us and Palm Coast. So I think maybe I can see why Palm Coast is listed as part of the Orlando MSA, or Orlando major economy.
Historically, it's my opinion that we are becoming more similar to the Jacksonville marketplace as we go forward, but it's an opinion. Okay.
Right, as we are growing more and more, and I think that line, that boundary is going to blur.
Okay, and then the last question, and I appreciate your patience. I didn't notice in the data any comment regarding housing market pricing. I had a conversation with a resident just before the meeting started today, talking about a lot near his home that today is selling for more than $50,000, and we both remember not that long ago when it would have been in the $12,000 to $15,000 range. The multiple is quite incredible. Do you have any comments regarding housing prices in our marketplace going forward, based on any of the data that you've looked at?
Right, so although I don't have the data provided in these slides, I have looked at the housing market data and also based on some of my personal perception, I think that most of the housing price increased in the last year. Majority of that, a big proportion of that will stay because a lot of the increase in housing prices because of the increasing demand that's coming from a lot of the inflow of the population to the Jacksonville area. And certainly a lot of the big companies are buying up. and make them rental properties.
So your opinion is not likely to be a fall or a temporary spike? In other words, the value is sustained by the inflow of folks wanting to move to Florida?
Yes, I'm not saying that it will not come down. It will come down because we know that it is still governed to some extent by the demand, well, definitely governed by the force of demand and supply. And when the interest rate continue to go up, the cost of borrowing money, a mortgage, is increasing, and that will certainly reduce the demand. And however, we also see that some of those increased demand in the last year is due to the inflow of population. And so those will stay unless those people all decided I'm moving out of Florida, so I'm selling my properties. This is not going to be a housing market crash we saw, back in 2007. So because, we know that one of the things that's propping up the housing market is also because of the strong performance in labor market. People are getting jobs, getting better paid, and so they can afford to buy a home. So that's not fake.
Okay. Very good. And also, just lastly, I appreciate your conservative approach to your forecast and to your summary. Thank you. Vice Mayor, comments, questions?
The housing market, since you touched on it, isn't the trend nationally where in the West, the housing market is really starting to decline in prices, and we're just kind of lagging behind that? I mean, my understanding is if you look west, like if you go to west of Texas, out to California, prices have begun to really drop and those things. We've seen a slight decline in prices here. I mean, well, maybe even more because there was that one period where it spiked so high. But, houses used to be under contract here within hours of being put on a market. You'd have multiple bidders. They do escalation clauses. We're not seeing any of that anymore here. I mean, houses are on the market for a long period of time, and prices drop down. There's always price reduction. So, I mean, do you think that Florida is going to do better than a lot of places because people are fleeing the Northeast to get here? But at some point, I'm not very confident about that either. I mean, got a national handle on this at all and where we're headed?
I don't really have that detailed look at the data in the other economic areas. So the reason for the price drop in the West Coast, I haven't done an extensive study to understand why that's the case. But a lot of the natural disasters and the water shortage in the past, that could have led to some people fleeing the state. But I'm not saying that's a reason. I'm just guessing here.
All right, thank you.
Councilperson?
Good morning, and thank you for your presentation. I had a couple questions for you, a couple of the slides on the trends that we're seeing. So what have you seen as the most stable industries or labor sectors in the past year? And then what do you see as the most stable industries moving forward into this next fiscal year?
Okay, in general, I will consider healthcare is always the sector that's more of a recession-proof sector because we have aging populations and we have the cost of healthcare continue to rise, and we have more and more advanced medical treatment and procedures that are available to people, and people will want those. So healthcare sector continue to be a very strong sector. Although we saw in the last month there may be a dip in terms of the wage rate, but I don't think that really indicate any significant change to that reality.
So is there another one other than healthcare? And that's a fine answer. I'm just curious if there are a couple that we can see as stable, because we are looking to grow our economic development. So as we look at the more recession-proof industries to try to bring here, that's the only reason I ask.
Okay, so I think in Florida, it's several major sectors, especially in this area. In Florida overall, we know that hospitality and leisure is definitely a major sector. And in Jacksonville area, we are a major transportation hub. So transportation logistics, that remain to be a very strong performer in our area. The thing with leisure and hospitality is that it's subject to seasonal fluctuation a lot. So I think you would just have to expect that there's a lot of fluctuation in leisure and hospitality sectors. But I think overall it is still a key for economy.
What industries have you seen have been most affected by
Increasing energy prices. Okay, so transportation and logistics, certainly they need to be, so gasoline energy is certainly a major component of their production. However, in the data, we see that they are continue to be doing good. But that doesn't mean that they are not subject to energy price change, because, had the energy price not been so high, they could have been much better, right? So I think that is a sector that is most affected by the energy price. Well, in the slides that I have, I think that will be the one other than manufacturing, because I think manufacturing also use a lot of energies in their production process. So those are probably the major sector I will highlight.
Okay, and then you said that obviously we can see the CPI start to dip once we see the producer price index dip. What do you usually see as the timeline between those two?
I do not know that.
Okay, fair enough.
I know there is a lag, but I just don't know how long it would take to trickle down. I think it depends on a lot of factors, the inventory levels, because if the inventory level is high, whatever the producer are experiencing, that may not be directly trickling down, because there are still inventory to be offered, right, to consumers. But so I don't know how long it would take for that to get to consumer level.
Okay, thank you.
I thought you were going to ask him for a good stock pick.
That was next.
Councilperson.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. Everyone has kind of hit on the questions and concerns that I would have. But my main concern is industry and economic development coming into Palm Coast. What are your thoughts and predictions on that? Because we need, with all the influx of and growth that is coming here to Palm Coast, we also need to focus on industry, businesses, and economic development. So what are your predictions and thoughts on that?
So I'm not knowledgeable enough about this region to know what will be the focus, where the focus should be in terms of economic development. So would you be able to tell me what has been the major performer in the local sector?
I didn't really.
Sector it's probably not manufacturing, if I have to guess.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, not manufacturing, that would be affirmative. I was going to ask.
Well, and if I could just add to that, and at our leisure, Mr. DiLorenzo and our economic development team, we have actually some startups locally in the marketplace that are focused on manufacturing, which, in terms of an incubator, might be well worth watching. So I don't want to give the impression that it doesn't exist. There are seeds that are planted out there that are beginning to sprout, in some rather interesting ways, so we might just want to keep a watch on that, that's all.
Agreed, and I think those are some of the most important seeds that we have to make sure that we provide the environment for them to be able to flourish. There's a tremendous also businesses that are run out of homes today that I think are going to be a future opportunity for the city to be able to help them get to the next level. I was discussing with some staff this morning about that. I would just like to thank you very much for coming back, giving us the update. All this information is always very valuable. I was going to ask about resiliency and safeguarding our economy by asking what sectors are potential for us to diversify into, but that question has already been posed. I would just ask, I'm just curious, retrospectively, looking back to last year around this time, the charts are, I mean, you'd have to have like 20 magic 8 balls to be able to predict the charts from today last year. Is there anything that we can glean from that experience of just not really having exact, I mean, if we look back over this past year, I don't think there's any way we could have predicted that. So the foresight that we were lacking back then, were there indicators that we could look back now retrospectively and say we couldn't see at the time because of the data not being available to us, that maybe we're sitting on right now that indicate whether or not the soft landing is going to occur or something that's much more harsh? Or is there anything that's indicative one way or the other right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest puzzle to me, but I'm sure that it's on a lot of economists' mind, is what contributed to this sustained inflation that's so hard to tame. You know, I understand the reluctancy in talking about the impact of a lot of the large-scale spending by the federal government and trickling down from infrastructure plans to CARES Act to American Rescue Plan to the student loan forgiveness program, etc. All of those were pumping money into the economy, and which provided fuel to the fire, you know, to make that demand so strong, it's really hard to, at the same time, you are raising interest rate, trying to control it, but you are growing it at the same time. So I'm especially macroeconomists, look into the contribution of all those major government spending, its impact on this current condition. Inflation rate, as soon as the data become available. You know, we are not close to the data being available yet, because you know, you have to wait for a year or two until all this trickling down of the government spending, and then to see the long-term impact. So it's still quite a while before we get to that point, but that will be one thing that I think maybe we will only find out a few years later.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah. Good, thank you. In conclusion, so we appreciate the information. That's the introduction. This city council is now tasked with stepping forward into our strategic action plan process. We, in short order, have to digest what you have just given us, which is an incredibly large challenge. So I ask you this, and to the Vice Mayor's comments and questions early in the presentation, and we're going to be asked this by our residents and our community. Would I be wrong to say that a giant 30,000-foot takeaway from your presentation today would be that here in Palm Coast, we may suffer more than some, but we will fare better than most?
Yeah, I think that's a right assessment.
Okay, all right. Again, transitioning from the detail and the data that you've just given us to our strategic action plan is certainly a challenge for each one of us. And I'm, working through it to find my best way to do it, how to apply it, because there are so many layers. But thank you. This is the right approach to do it. So appreciate your traveling to see us. And we welcome you to the #1 city in our MSA.
Forward to
Thank
come
you.
back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now move to what was #1 on our agenda, which will be a presentation, the Strategic Action Plan Evaluation Workshop #1. And our Assistant City Manager, Ms. Lauren Johnston, will preside over that presentation.
Good morning, Mayor and City Council. Lauren Johnson, Assistant City Manager, and I'm here with Ms. Jen Fivash. She's our Battalion Chief of Training for the Fire Department. And we are here to walk you through your Strategic Action Plan Evaluation 1.
Can I stop you just for a minute? I appreciate that. I feel this is important. I left off that we are starting really digging into our strategic action plan process now. In my mind, it is the blueprint, and we begin forward stepping in this process. I, for one, will be cautious about not presuming a budget, a millage, or a tax implication ahead of the process. In other words, I'm going to work through the process in each step and not try to work from the back to the front of this process. And if you agree that that would be the right approach, I would share that with City Council as my view on the process. The second part of what is really important today is that each of us work towards a consensus, because it's the strategic action plan priorities that represent the vision that we are by charter responsible for offering to city staff, so that they then can attach the numbers and it'll become their operating regimen going forward for the future. So I will, we'll work around the dais throughout this session today to look for consensus, whether we agree or we don't agree, because staff needs to know how we all feel, because they have collected the comments from each one of us, what our wants and what our needs are, and today we are the filter to see what drops through that. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just to give the public a little bit of information, strategic planning is the process of setting goals, deciding on actions to achieve these goals, and mobilizing the resources needed to take place in those actions. A strategic plan describes how these goals will be achieved and what resources will be used to achieve them. And that's very much in line with your introduction, Mayor, and also how we set the stage for our timeline as we approach the budget process. This is where we are in the process. In February and March, we conducted our annual interviews with each member of City Council. We're here today as a consideration for all of those priorities into one presentation, another listening session, if you will. We will come back on April 25th, which is another special budget workshop, to just make sure we heard you correctly before we go into adoption on May the 2nd. And then finally, as we enter the budget process, we as SAP will give you a presentation on how those goals will be achieved, and we break those down and consider any cost, any time for staff to deliver these priorities to completion. Any questions on our process? So next we're going to reinforce our pillars of priorities. And these are definitions and themes that encompass City Council's focus areas. So we heard through the listening session some verbiage that was suggested to be changed. In the strong we need to improve financial strengths within the city, to promote fiscal responsibility and secure future sustainability. Just want to hear Council's consensus on modification of that pillar.
I think that's a positive improvement.
Great.
Vice Mayor? Vice Mayor?
No comment.
I think we're good.
Okay. The next pillar is safe and reliable services. We heard verbiage change to a safe community for all is the catalyst to ensure that residents and all visitors have exceptional quality amenities year-round. Good? Okay. And in the civic engagement pillar, we heard promote the opportunity for communication between the decision makers and the public, enhance existing channels through which accurate and timely information is disseminated from the city.
You know, this is interesting, but it's all very broad. So I think that's why you're not hearing a lot of specifics. You know what I mean? It's all real nice, but, you know, promote the opportunity for communications. Money putting things people aren't see or read, narrowly define some of this stuff, and then make it economically feasible and make it work. And so to sit here and just agree with this doesn't really mean much at this moment.
Well, Vice Mayor, I appreciate the comment. I do think it's the starting point. So let me try with civic engagement just as one example. So I think we all recognize that we want to improve our engagement, our communication, our touch to our residents. Now, it will be up to staff. That's a vision, a goal. It's up to staff to come back to you, to me, to each of us, to say, this is how we suggest we do it, and this is what it'll cost. Then it will be up to us to say, A, B, C, D, E, yes, no, whatever it is. So I think we'll get there, but it is a process, and I do understand that this is a very broad, but if we don't as a group come to consensus, staff can't really bring us that next step, which is what we're looking for. That's what you're thirsty for, and I think we'll get there.
Right, and again, you know, it's I don't want us just signing off on these wonderful statements here and then saying, okay, and
No, the sign-off is at the end. It's not now.
yeah.
The sign-off is when you get to the numbers.
because I think we all want a safe community, and we want quality of amenities and all of that stuff. But it's just, you know, I don't want us to get sort of sucked into these wonderful statements and then, you know,
Well,
write a blank check.
no. So, good point. The truth be told, in the next step, actually, it's not the next step, it'll be the step after that, I believe. The numbers will show up, and that will, the truth be told. Okay?
So I think, Lauren, you're looking up expecting responses, and it's just kind of, you know, we're
And
not quite there yet.
I appreciate that, Vice
No, I
Mayor.
mean-
Yes, sir. So these are really your goal statements. It helps staff drive from your goal to your objective and the strategy on how to implement these priorities. So we want to make sure we have good operational framework, and these are the pillars that decide that framework.
Right.
It's all encompassing is what we try and do.
Okay, thank you.
Councilperson, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, if I may, just for the benefit of everybody watching and listening, I think if I understand what these are, because I actually shared, if you recall, Lauren, my initial conversations with you, I shared those same concerns, which is, oh, these sound very nice and they're very broad, but what do they really tell us? And from my understanding, it's so that when we do come up with our actual more specific priorities, we kind of have a bucket to put them in, and we're not excluding anybody's priorities because they don't fit in one of these rather more broad buckets that we can all agree are very important for our community. So if I understand, that's kind of this is the high level, and then we get more and more narrow as we go through the process.
Yes, ma'am, that is the approach.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And the last priority modification was build and effectively manage sustainable infrastructure that promotes clean water, safe streets, and green infrastructure. Okay, we're going to move on to, we're reaffirming our mission, vision, and values. The only modification here that we heard through the listening session was in the second bullet for providing exceptional amenities and standards that support high-quality lifestyles and promote cultural activities. And this really is your vision, City Council. It's what you want the community to look like in the next 10 years. It's all-encompassing, again, that this is your vision.
In a very, very general sense, or a very wide-mouth bucket. Now, the marbles will have to be put in, and we'll decide how heavy that bucket becomes.
Okay. So we're going to move into our first pillar, which is strong, resilient economy. And the first priority being a modified priority stating town center should promote a home for arts and culture, including opportunities for performance, display, and creative expression. And an objective here is staff to investigate grant opportunities and other funding sources.
Yeah, I think that that part, investigate grant opportunities should be high up there on the list, because we don't have 20-something million dollars just to build a.
And Vice Mayor, to your point, in my opinion anyway, this particular pillar represents a change in the definition of town center from its original creation. The Economist referenced in a slide a change in retail. The bricks and mortar retail equation of the past, when town center was envisioned, 20 or more years ago, has changed a lot. The circumference of town center has been filled in with retail. Now we're tasked with the concept of why do people want to come inside of town center. So this may represent a change in that definition, which most likely would have to be funded by revenue sources through perhaps grant opportunities or some other source, which I can't possibly name at this point.
So if I may, I do want to chime in on this one, because I know that there's a lot of passion out there to make town center a cultural kind of hub for us and an arts hub, and I would love to see that happen. My concern is the financial aspect of it. I understand that we do have a study out right now that is diving into what this type of idea will bring into the city, what it will cost us at a more intimate level. And I do hope that from City Council, what I'm hoping to get consensus on is that we don't, we pump the brakes a little bit on this until we see those costs, because right now I think that we're at a precipice where if we don't really start to invest in our economic development, we are not going to be sustainable. So if I'm looking at where I want to put monies at this point in our growth, this to me is a luxury, and I'm not sure that it will create an immediate economic return on investment. Like an investment into economic development will. So I'm just asking that from City Council, we look at the cost benefit of diving into this now versus maybe putting monies into economic development now and having a bigger vision for this down the road.
I think everyone agrees, but let me just add to that just another thought. We have built over these last several years a very, very strong relationship. Today is a good example. We had an economist here from UNF. We look at and it'll come later in a slide, but I think I want to make a note here, that we might look to these higher level academic institutions to become the, I'll hesitate, but I'll use the word benefactors of a process like this, which I think would accomplish your goal. So that would not deny our economic development any investment, but might offer a branding or an opportunity for these universities to build a bigger home here in our Palm Coast.
And that would then bring a bit of brick and mortar with it too, if it was to expand out like that. And that's really where I think our focus should be.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to make sure that we're not kind of getting wrapped up in this, what I think is kind of a little bit of an ideological idea. And we're not proceeding with blinders on, having this ultimate, idea at the end of the rainbow. So I just ask for that open-mindedness as we move forward.
Does that give staff a direction? I think everybody. Does anybody have a comment? I think we all are pretty well aligned on that.
I think having the vision of where we want to go, but also having the feasibility studies, it's necessary so that we know where we can potentially go. Like the late John Nett said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And I think that the work that our staff has done in presenting us with the options for potentially going down different paths in the future is very valuable, although, of course, we have to keep our financial prudence on the forefront of our thought.
Thank you, Mayor. The next priority is Palm Coast brands its future as a city on the rise to include becoming a regional model for medical training and careers.
it's just a thought that this is one of the Lego building blocks for economic development. And I'm glad to hear that our expert in economy, and thank you for having him bring that out. But it's just one. A Lego block build has many blocks. This is potentially one that is, kind of already in our set on our board.
Okay. The next priority is strengthen and maintain relationships with key recurring meetings and proactive approaches to further. We heard through the listening sessions were to move this priority into operations. We hear that it's a directive of City Council to continue to maintain these relationships, but it could possibly come off the priority list.
And if I could just make one comment. An observation of mine from a couple years back now is that I felt a giant void, or perhaps a gap, in City Council's communication and relationship to stakeholders, business stakeholders and entrepreneurs within the city of Palm Coast. We kind of didn't have it. And I'm hoping that this slide represents a renewed investment in our time to make those stakeholders partners and find out what they can offer to help us be successful, again, towards economic development and all the other things that are surrounded by it. And I think that that's a challenge for all of City Council. I mean, I would go as far as to, creating a list of those stakeholders, and perhaps we would split them up amongst us and create those relationships so that everybody, because we can't, we have sunshine, we can't do it. We can only do it in a group at a meeting like this, but I think it needs more than that. And I think that we should take on these folks and learn from them, because they are one of the keys to our future success, is my opinion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I think that this should be a standard of practice, and I'm glad to see this move more to operations versus it being this kind of indefinite priority, which is an oxymoron, but I like the idea of getting a list of the stakeholders. I also very much welcome any of our stakeholders emailing us about events that they're having, open houses, things like that. I know I love to see when any of them are speaking at like our Tiger Bay functions, so I appreciate their involvement in our community, and I appreciate staff keeping us involved with them so that we can work together to help the city.
Great. The next priority is develop economic opportunity tools and communication strategies to support and sustain. This is a modified priority. We also heard several key approaches. Create a business recruitment process to diversify our business offerings in our community. Develop a fast tracking process to cut red tape, minimize delays in opening, and make more financially feasible. And the last being focus on commercial development, including retail and restaurants in the town center core.
I think the develop a fast tracking process and cut red tape really is an important part of this. We have to make it easier for people to come here and do things, not make it difficult. And the less red tape, I know we have complaints I hear from developers. Much tape, our process takes too long. It can be frustrating. And I think we really need to trim it back. And that's a challenge for staff.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Danko, because this was something that I have been a very big advocate for and tried to really champion, is this fast tracking of really helping our small businesses. And I think we're seeing an initiative even out of Tallahassee to kind of help in that regard as well. So I think it's a really good idea to kind of piggyback on this and take advantage of what they're doing and working within ourselves legislatively, even if that's possible, to really help our small businesses, not only from a bureaucracy standpoint, but from a financial standpoint, because I think anybody who's had a small business recognizes how expensive it can be. So I appreciate this entire slide. I'm very excited about this, so I hope we can get everybody on board with this one, because this is the heart of our community, our small businesses. And if you look at what our economic development team has put together, it's very evident that small businesses really run this community.
And I'm in agreement with Vice Mayor Danko and Teresa Pontieri that we do need to find a way to cut some of the red tape and make it much easier and feasible for businesses to come into Palm Coast, because that's another thing that I hear in the community all the time. It's so difficult to get started here in Palm Coast. So we need to look at that and find a way to cut some of the red tape.
Councilman?
I think cutting red tape's a good thing. I meant, yeah. Perfect.
Okay, moving on. Our next priority is Palm Coast's future expansion is guided by master planning for smart managed growth and fueled by sustaining a conservation green print. This was modified from the previous, the westward expansion, giving us more opportunity for enhancing deliverables. Okay?
No, I'm just thinking for a second.
Okay.
I had in mind, having studied this presentation and this SAP very carefully, that we might in fact need a fifth pillar of priority. However, in looking at this pillar, I want to get City Council's take. It's my opinion, based on the study, the analysis, and the data that I have collected, that the future financial sustainability of the city of Palm Coast is in jeopardy in the long term. What that means is that the misskewed ad valorem tax base cannot be easily corrected just by the traditional Palm Coast that we know and enjoy and respect. We have before us an opportunity, unimproved western Palm Coast, that can be the salvation through master planning and offers us the opportunity to do a lot of things that might not be done in a similar amount of time or even possibly in the traditional setting of Palm Coast. So I'm willing to forego the addition of an additional pillar of priority in favor of this modified strong resilient economy slide if we are all in consensus that we have before us an opportunity, which is really the only opportunity on the east coast of Florida for any city. We have that ahead of us. It is up to us to make it successful through a master planning process that includes many different development bubbles. In other words, it ranges everywhere from industrial to commercial to retail to residential and many, many more for us to put together in something that will be strong and financially resilient, offering a lifestyle that perhaps is even better than we deserve or earn today for not just tomorrow, but for the future generations to come. These decisions, make no mistake about it, will last for our children and our children's children. So it is up to us to make these decisions. So it is a very daunting task. And I just wanted to get a take from each of you on if you see that within the words on this slide.
I see it within our conversation. I'm not quite sure the words actually translate, but as long as we know we're on track and we know where we're going,
Okay.
I fully agree.
And it's just words, but conceptually.
Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're saying. But, heading, the westward expansion is so vital to the future of this city. We can't sustain our economic base on our ad valorem tax. We can't have 92% of our residents paying all the taxes. It's hurting them. And we need to change that model. We need more businesses. We need more investment. We need more of that type of stuff. So I'm not quite sure this slide says it, but as long as we all understand it and stay focused on it, then that's fine.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, Vice Mayor and Mayor Alford.
Actually, let's let everybody make their comments before
Sure.
you comment.
Sure.
So I 100% agree with you, Mayor, and the words that you said, and I don't think that it can. I do think that this slide encompasses a lot of what we are saying in a very high-level form, in that we need to be guided by master planning for smart managed growth. And when I see smart managed growth, I'm thinking making sure the infrastructure is in place prior to us going forward and building. When I see master planning, I think of looking at this not in silos, but as an overall picture of what we conceptually want this to be, look like, what percentage we want it to be manufacturing versus industrial versus leisure if we're doing the sports complex, whatever that may be. The problem that I have with this, and not that I'm in no way, shape, or form against green space, but to say that we need to be fueled by sustaining a conservation green print, I don't know that that accurately captures what we should be fueled by. So while I do agree that that needs to be a consideration always in the city of Palm Coast, because that's one of the wonderful things that we, a part of the westward expansion, if it's fueled by green space, I don't know that that is going to bring in what we need. So I think that that portion of it could probably be readdressed. I also am curious what City Council's perspective would be about bringing somebody in to kind of be the project manager for this project, for really overseeing this entire expansion. I know I'm not a fan of spending more money than we have to, but considering the gravity of it, considering the forever implications of it, is it worth looking into hiring somebody to be somewhat of a project manager for the city overseeing this entire project?
Might that be a strategy or a tactic that you could bring back to us at the next, well said. And if I may, just because we're going around the line, I just want everyone, I'm a little bit passionate in my introduction regarding the expansion and what I refer to just as a working name as the Frontier. Make no mistake about it, nothing done on behalf of the Frontier is going to take away from the lifestyle that our residents in the traditional side of Palm Coast currently enjoy. We're not taking from one for the other. That's not the concept. I don't want anybody to misunderstand that.
I think the goal is actually to take less from them in the way of dollars.
Actually, that's better said.
Yeah.
Yes.
And relieve
Agreed.
pressure, I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
I mean, I'll just give an example, and I don't know if I mentioned this before at another meeting, but I got my homeowner's insurance bill. All right, it's due April 25th. It went from $1,600 to $2,900 a year. I mean, that's a big increase. And if I know all of our residents are experiencing it. And we have a lot of folks on fixed incomes. We have a lot of folks that are in lower paying jobs. And they're struggling to get by. And for me, that should be a slide almost, at least in our mind, to consider what we're doing here. Because I agree with Councilwoman Pontieri on the green thing here too. The green space or whatever these pictures are. That can't be what we focus on. We have to focus on bringing in smart growth and development that will bring businesses and contribute financially to our city.
And hold that wonderful thought about the insurance, because I suffered the same thing. We're going to get to another slide where we can actually be active about it, I think.
If I may too, I almost think that we should be, and I kind of thought of Councilman Clufus, it says fueled by sustaining green conservation, which I find to be somewhat of a ironic use of words there. But I think we should also be fueled by what is naturally around us. So we've got a 4-lane US 1 right there that we can really feed off of as far as the industry, manufacturing, whatever it may be that we bring in. We've got 95 that's not far from there as well. So when we are looking at planning, and if we want to really say that we're fueled by something, let's build on what we already have. In other words, what we don't have to spend money on, because it's already in place. So just when we're thinking about what really should be driving some of this, the resources that are already in place that we don't have to spend money on is actually what I think we should be fueled by.
So you might think of it, not these words, but we could fuel it by our blessed regional location.
Absolutely, yes.
No comment.
Yeah, I think all those comments are totally viable. I think as we go on to the next couple of slides, we'll see some additional context that kind of pushes us more towards the actual economic development standpoint instead of focusing on the greenery. But I would also just be reminded, something reminds me of the quote that we didn't inherit this planet from our parents and grandparents, we're borrowing it from our grandchildren. And I think that's something important. to keep in
Nicely
mind.
said.
Thank you.
Okay. Are you good with our comments? That changes you a little bit?
Yes, Mayor.
Or a
What I
lot.
was going to say is we'll better define some deliverables and objectives and clean up some language here. The next priority is inventory, assess, and identify optimal use of city land assets. As you recall from your January update on this priority, the city had developed a team, and they will present to you their findings and analysis and next steps. And that presentation will come to you this summer.
Okay. And just as a footnote here, I look at this as a potential revenue source, assuming an outcome which I've not seen yet, but when we talk about, you see throughout the presentation, identify new and different and alternative revenue sources. This is potentially an example of what one could be.
Okay. The next priority was suggested to move to operations as well. Continue smart, sustainable, long-term growth of the city of Palm Coast. Staff will conduct a comprehensive evaluation and appraisal report analysis to update planning horizon of 2045. And if you recall as well from your January update, that the city has or is underway with hiring a consultant to update the comprehensive plan. We've developed a team to run that project for us, and we are underway with this priority.
So that's a lot of words for, and facilitator, I think is the right word that we used actually, to open up the comp plan. It's been a
Yes.
lot of years so that the public can weigh in on how our comprehensive plan should be modified and updated for the future.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And we are, staff is actively collaborating with the county. They have also opened up their comprehensive plan, and they have monthly check-ins on just how status is going and sharing progress. This is a new priority, conduct analysis of new and untapped revenue sources to help lessen the reliance on residential property taxes and relieve the burden on residential homeowners.
I think you've heard from everybody here that that's yes.
Okay. The next one is a new priority as well.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Mayor.
Property taxes and relieve burden on residential homeowners. Now, you know, renters feel the same pressure, not renters, but yeah, actually renters feel the same pressure in a different way. So I wouldn't want to carve out just the residential homeowners. The rest of our residents, and I don't know a percentage off the top of my head, but they suffer just as well through their rent payment. So just to make it clear, if we could be a little bit more inclusive so that it's all of our.
Well, the owners of those rentals suffer.
Yeah, well, I mean,
And they
it's,
have to pass that
yeah,
down
I don't want,
on
what
to
I'm trying not to do is pick out just that one only group, because
Yeah.
that suffering is shared by everybody that lives here in the
Well,
community.
everyone who
one
runs
way
a
or the other.
business here, owns
Yeah.
a home here,
Okay.
rents here, absolutely.
Ready to move on? Okay. New priority, millage rate should be revenue neutral for taxpayers.
Do we have consensus?
Well, yeah, we're gonna get to the millage rate at some point.
Yeah, okay. Do we have, you have a full consensus on that slide?
Okay. Moving on to our next priority is staff to conduct an analysis of commercial solid waste hauling.
In what respect?
So I'll
Oh,
pipeline.
just bear in mind, okay, a city council member has brought this to the attention
Right,
of
so I
staff
just
as a
kinda wanna
priority.
know if
So-
it was yours, I'd wanna know what it means.
Yeah, no, but it's just to set the stage, so go ahead.
I'll pipe
I-
in and
okay.
answer
I
that.
wasn't asking,
No,
okay,
I
but go ahead.
understand. So, No, but I'm happy to. So I think that there, and I kind of learned this when Councilwoman Hyder and I were at our training in speaking with other cities in the state of Florida. A lot of them do their own commercial waste hauling, and they make a lot of money off of it. It's a revenue source that we have not explored, and we don't pay peanuts for what we're currently paying for waste hauling. And so I think that if we just do an analysis, and this goes to the overall kind of idea that I've had, and I championed the last thing as well, which was to conduct an analysis of untapped revenue sources. We are way too reliant on, as you stated, Vice Mayor, on the homestead or the residential property taxes that we're bringing in, rather than diversifying kind of our revenue portfolio. And so if we can look and see what the return on investment will be for us to do commercial solid waste hauling, especially as we move west and we're engaging in economic development for these new commercial properties, commercial businesses that come in, that we can really tap into a lot of money that we just haven't explored before. So this is more, I'm not asking anybody to commit to this, I'm asking that we just analyze what we can make and the time span that we can make it. In other words, if we have to invest a little bit for 2 years, but we're looking at a 2-decade return on investment that's exponential, that's what I'm looking for. Because if we don't diversify our revenues, we are going to be in a whole heap of trouble and not very far off time span.
Agreed. And as a step between now and perhaps the future, I would also ask, and it doesn't need to be a part of this slide, but that study also include the fact that the city of Palm Coast does not currently have a contract that earns our city anything for commercial waste hauling. I'd like to know if and when, especially with regard to the frontier, if that becomes a possibility, which may precede that as a revenue source sooner than later. I don't know the answer. It's just a question.
Sure.
Okay. Moving on to the next pillar is safe and reliable services. The first priority here is ensure that the maintenance and operation complex is the top priority project, commence initial based on the capital plan time.
How long has this project been in the works?
At least 4 or 5 years now.
Okay.
Back when I was...
Okay, moving on to our next priority, a modified priority, identify local recreation demands, including aquatics, field, senior services, et cetera, to balance the need of regional activity centers. Objectives here being prioritize projects on the Parks and Recreation Capital Improvement Plan and evaluate grants for various park projects. This is a modified priority, but also if you recall, we are underway with the county-wide recreation master plan that should be coming to a conclusion this summer, and prioritization of those park projects is identified in that scope, and that will be to you again this summer.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to the next priority, it's modified, seek opportunities for the community center to help relieve parking pressures through the following approaches. And this was evaluate the option to repurpose Fire Station 22 and preserve the historical value and expand the visitor awareness of Palm Coast. If you recall from previous council presentations, the city has hired the designer Schinken Schultz for the design of Fire Station 22 and 26. Also in their scope is to do an analysis of this exact priority. That result will come to City Council as a future presentation. I don't have a timeline on that yet, but it's still being worked on. It's still in progress.
So for the benefit of the media and the press, this is something in discussion. There has been no decision of any kind for any reason made. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I'm sorry.
And you said this was going to be coming to us when?
I don't have a timeline, but we're in progress with the evaluation.
So that will include numbers
Yes, sir.
of what it will cost, or?
Right.
So we basically will have to make our decision once we see the numbers.
Yes, sir.
And I also want to add on to that, I know that we missed the window for appropriations from Tallahassee specifically for any money to go towards Fire Station 22, but I don't want to shut the door on that possibility in the future. I do know that we had some residents reach out to some of our folks in Tallahassee about this. I also chimed in on this. So I don't want our community to think that we are very quick to bulldoze Fire Station 22, to your point, Mayor. There are other possibilities that we're still looking at. So while, yes, we need to wait on this study, just exploring if there are other options out there as well is something that I do think that the community needs to know we're looking at.
And we can keep that in mind as Mr. DiLorenzo works through the legislative ask for next year. It'll be on a much quicker timeline. We're already talking about next year's request, even though this year's session hasn't closed.
Would you be willing to have Mr. DiLorenzo and Chief make their comments at the next SAP number 2 with regard to repurpose or things like that? Once they get, we're set in this. I think it's premature to take their opinions at this moment, if you're in agreement with that. Is
Certainly,
that okay?
I think it would even be worthwhile to wait until we get the study back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll hold off. I know you guys are chomping at the bit, but I think it's premature right now. I don't want you to steer an outcome. I would rather get to the next step, okay?
Well, and we still have a parking situation to deal with
Yes.
over there.
Well, that's,
which
and I don't want to just move it one way. So I appreciate your patience.
The next priority is on service contracts, provide adequate quality control and ensure contract. SAP update. The city hired a solid waste, her title is Residential Collection Supervisor, and she's managing the solid waste hauling contract. She's actually doing some more proactive programs with the Adopt a Median and Right Away. She's helped with the neighborhood and also the community-wide Clean Up Palm Coast event. And that's a really high value, an example of a high value contract. The other contracts, administration oversees or HR with our benefits package, et cetera.
So Vice Mayor, there's an example of when we start getting to the numbers, we'll look at that and we'll look at a cost-effective and valuation. So I'm with you. It's coming. We'll get there. Okay.
This is a new priority. Evaluate hiring a dedicated grant writer for the city to encourage the multitude of grants from federal and state agencies.
I'm sure we're all in agreement. I just have to say this. I think, what'd you use the word when we were talking about the millage rate? It had to be net?
Neutral.
Net neutral. I love that concept, net neutral. So I love the concept of grant writers that work on a net neutral basis. In other words, they get paid off of what they bring.
I'm 100% in agreement with that. So this was another one that I was very vocal about. I think a city of our size and the amount of growth that we're undergoing, the parks that we want to continue to feed, a dedicated grant writer is necessary. I will tell you, when I met with all of the department heads at the beginning, after first being elected, I asked every single one of them, are you missing out on grants right now? Because of a bandwidth issue. It's nothing that anybody's doing wrong. It's just there's only so much time in the day. So we're definitely missing out on state and federal monies, and it's not for anybody's fault. It's just a lack of bandwidth. And I think that a grant writer, and I agree with the mayor's comment, is well worth their weight in gold. So this is one that I hope we can get on board with, and if it needs to be, there needs to be more direction added to this based on the mayor's comments. I don't have any objection to that.
I couldn't agree with you more, especially for a city that's #1 in its MSA.
Absolutely.
Okay. Moving on to another new priority, continue to focus on residential safety and conduct a comprehensive approach to neighborhood safety. Objectives here being evaluate legality and possibility of lowering residential street speed limits, explore what speed tracking devices have successfully reduced residential speeds in comparable cities and communities, and work with the sheriff's office to identify and enforce problem areas.
And I have to somehow connect A and C. So I don't know about lowering speeds. how you do it or how it's possible. You'll come back to us and tell us what that is. But if in fact that we can, then obviously it's the sheriff that would have to enforce it. I mean, we, as a city, have no ability to enforce a speed limit, is that correct? I mean, I don't know, just asking rhetorically. We would need the assistance of the sheriff's office to enforce a change to make the streets safer.
I agree, and I know our sheriff, he's done a wonderful job. And it's he's got all the flagler to deal with. It's not easy, but I've just and we discussed this before, the driving that we all have seen is just out of control. I actually watched, coming here today, I had to slow down for a school zone. Someone went flying by me at 50 miles an hour in a school zone with the lights flashing. I was like, are you kidding me? Folks have gotten kind of crazy out there.
Kinda is putting it lightly.
Is putting it politely.
Yes.
So I do, for safety's sake, want to see our sheriff and his deputies spending a little more time, and yeah, I'm sorry if you get a ticket, but maybe that'll make you think next time about speeding or rolling through that red light or whatever you're doing. So I think it's a very, very, we talk about safety on our streets and everything. This is an important priority. And it won't cost us any more money. The sheriff will just maybe have to juggle around some more heads or, plan accordingly, I guess.
So this was another one that I've really tried to push, especially evaluating the legality and possibility of lowering the speed limits. And to answer your question, Mayor, I've spoken with Director Greenwald on this specific issue, worked with the city attorney already, and know the studies that we need to do in order to justify the lowering of the speed limit to 30, or rather from 30 to 25 miles per hour. What I would ask from some of our staff from either the sheriff's office and or the fire department is the statistics on the damage that is incurred on streets that are 30 miles per hour versus 25 miles per hour. Because in the research that I've seen, when there are accidents, when people are hit, if it's on a street that has a speed limit of 30 miles per hour versus 25 miles per hour, the damage is actually significantly less. And for as many people that we have in our neighborhoods without sidewalks, mind you, that walk their dogs, that walk with their kids or their spouses, that's a very important statistic in my mind. So getting whatever studies we need to put in place. I know we've already spoken to certain companies, so I commend staff for already kind of getting a jump on this. And then with regards to the sheriff's office, I agree with you, Mayor, and I have an inkling that because of our population growth, we will see the sheriff in front of us asking for more deputies. So, and while I do not object to exploring that option whatsoever, I would ask that we get some dedication to enforcing the speed. I think that that's a fair trade-off. When you're giving something, when you're giving money, when you're allowing the hiring of more deputies, to say we care this much about our residential safety that yes, we're happy to feed into the sheriff's office, but we want to see some tangible results in the form of enforced speed limits, especially on our residential streets.
And also in the confidence of the community.
Absolutely.
That there is an improvement in the safety of the roads in their neighborhood. Okay. Councilman, agreed?
Agreed.
Very good. Okay.
Okay. Moving on to the next pillar is civic engagement. The priority is, in the spirit of the Arts District, create an arts program with community partners for the original blue and white neighborhood signs, entryway signs to transform them into art in public places. It was recommended to remove this priority due to a lack of funding source through our budgeting process. This is in the same fund as our road resurfacing program that operates at a deficit each year, and so unfortunately the priority hasn't been able to kick off just due to.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
You know, I was not a supporter of this. I think last last time we went through it. I think about it now. I'm unwilling to give away. It needs to remain as a pillar. However, I'm certainly willing to take responsibility to talk to some big landowner or benefactor who has an interest in the success of the future of Palm Coast to say, hey, why don't you help us out here and make us a model for the rest of the state with neighborhoods. I don't know how you do that. I'm not willing to just let it disappear forever. So maybe that's a personal priority that I'm willing to accept. Maybe there's another council member that would work on it separately.
We do have a existing neighborhood sign master plan.
Okay.
And as funding, it's more with the collaboration of projects. So if we do, add a right turn lane, then we will take that neighborhood sign and move it into the new, which is the coquina and the black looking sign, then the blue and white. So it's on a long-term replacement plan, but this particular priority isn't funded.
Okay, and I would ask city manager, is this something that through your staff you could underscore or highlight to the beautification committee? Because we've just added a member recently, and maybe they could continue to pursue this possibility. Because, I don't like kicking the can down the road when we don't have to. We kind of do have to at least punt it this time, but I don't want it to disappear, because, I'm not sure I want those markers to become historical monuments that we then have to protect. I don't think that's the goal here, if we're all in agreement with that, okay?
Yes, Mayor, that's an excellent avenue to pursue.
Okay.
Yep, I brought this up, I think, last priority, and it was a priority before. I just think we have a phenomenal opportunity. I know that I really value, one of the best things about coming home from my road trips, I go up to Long Island frequently, is getting off the exit. And there's nothing better than our signage. And when I came back home over the holidays, we had all of our Christmas trees, the palm trees with the Christmas decoration. It just feels like Palm Coast when you get off an exit. And I think we have an opportunity to make that our individual neighborhoods have that same type of essence and appeal through the neighborhood signage. And I just feel, I'm not upset with the signage at all. It's not terrible in any regard. And I think it's completely fine, and most often probably disregarded by people who are entering their neighborhoods. But I think it is one of the few avenues that we have that can really exemplify a neighborhood without, without doing anything drastic. This is kind of just something that I think is low-hanging fruit for somebody in the future, potentially once it has a funding source. I'm fine with taking it off the priorities, but I think it's just something that we should be mindful of, because it really offers a big opportunity for bang for a buck, because when you enter a neighborhood, that's the first thing you see, So.
So I appreciate your comment. Curb appeal is everything, and if we jump right back to economic development, those site selectors, those businesses, those future employees will be driving through our Palm Coast. So the better we look, the better they'll think of us. So it's there. Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to the next priority, staff to provide an inventory of potential facilities to the public naming policy in honor of Mayor Netz. On your agenda worksheet, you see a presentation coming to you soon by our Parks and Recreation Director, Mr. Hurst. So this should be complete this fiscal year.
And this is the culmination of a lengthy process of putting together a policy and procedure, and this is what came out of all of that agreed policy and procedure, correct?
Yes, the policy has already been adopted by City Council, and we've had 2 previous successes, so this is just honoring Mayor Netz.
Understood.
The next priority here is modified. This is encourage residents to learn more about their community and our history. The previous priority was seek out opportunities to engage Flagler County students on civic programs. And we heard through the listening process that our Palm Coast history was important, and working with various members of the community, regardless of age, and how do we connect them to our history.
It's undeniable, however, a footnote, perhaps it's a silent footnote, Okay, the budget for this has to be either from the community, from some grant, from some other place. That's where it's going to have to come from.
I fully agree with that.
But not lessening the importance of
Right,
sharing
right,
this
right.
for the future, but we will have to get creative to find a way to fund such an initiative.
This is a nice thing, obviously, but it's not one of those must-haves at this moment in time.
So, just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, Council. Would you like for this to remain on the priority list, or would you like for this to be a directive to Parks or the city manager via Parks and Recreation to be a program for that?
So let me ask the question. So I met with the Citizens Academy last night, which somebody here got to introduce the class on their first session. We had 37 registrants that participated, and everybody showed up. That's incredible. That's wonderful. Is our Citizens Academy connected to this in any way?
The Citizens Academy is one avenue, yes.
Yes.
The historical.
So, not an easy answer. Does it go away? No, of course not.
I think if I can step in, and maybe I agree that this is not something that we should spend a whole heap of money on, but I also don't think that it requires that. I think that through Palm Coast Connect and other avenues that we're already reaching out to our residents, we can encourage events that are going on in our community, specifically those that are connected with our history or agriculture, and that perhaps we can work with other groups that are active in the community to come to us with more activities and more opportunities for our residents to do this. So while I don't want to spend money on it, I don't think that this is one of those priorities that requires a whole lot of money, in which case it should be something that we can all get on board with. So if there's something, and I rely on staff to kind of come up with ideas and how we can do that, because that's not the wheelhouse that I work in. So whatever ideas listen to.
And maybe, I mean, just a top of mind suggestion, so you don't struggle with this forever. Does this fit on a prior pillar or that talks to quality of life? Because in my mind, this is one of those supporting elements to a better quality of life. It's almost, in my mind, it's almost an amenity. So you might look back and see if it kind of could belong there.
Excuse me. I agree that this is something that's important for our community, because I've found since I've been going out into the community that many people have no clue as to what is available here in our city as far as the historical sites and other amenities that are available. They don't know that they're here. They don't know that they exist, and many of them are interested in going to see these different things that exist here in the community. But I also don't see it as a high-cost item to the city to encourage the community to get more involved in their community and knowing the history of their community.
Yeah, I would absolutely concur. I think that we have a rare opportunity in our community where we have so many highly engaged individuals that are extremely passionate about where our city has been and where we're going and how we got to where we are. Everyone enjoys telling their story about how they made Palm Coast, because we're such a new city that a lot of these individuals were here from the very beginning, and they can tell you literally, you know, when this road was a dirt road, when this was one way. And I think that harnessing their passion in a way that we can maximize the touch points in our new user base, our new members of our community, is extremely important. But again, like the prior councilmen and councilwomen have said, funding mechanisms for this isn't something that I would like to dedicate a huge amount of money to, but I feel like their passion and their drive is something that we can use as a multiplier to our dollars to try to leverage, you know, our historical society in a way that has a large impact with minimal input as funds.
Okay.
Very good.
All right. Moving on to the next priority, research other cities' communication strategies on how they respond in a proactive and reactive measures with social media applications. And if you recall, this was also in your January update from our strategic action plan. that our Communications Division is an active board member of the local Florida Public Relations Association. They've hosted 2 quarterly meetings with local communications professionals from Flagler County, the Sheriff's Office, Flagler Beach, and Flagler Schools. And they are increasing engagement with our residents and educational opportunities.
So I just make a comment here, so it's complete, so it drops off. I continue on a search, a mission. Use facts, factual information into, I don't know the right context, social media content. I see innuendo, half-truths, misstatements, and downright lies. It bothers me to no end. I don't know the solution, but I will continue to work with the Florida League of Cities to find ways that we can offer our community factual information from the city of Palm Coast.
I agree with that.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, just get on next door, you know, and
I don't have the
you know,
answer, but I'll make it a mission.
you know, it's you read stuff that's just totally, unfortunately, wrong.
Yeah.
And if you step out there and you try to correct it, well, boom, yeah.
You know,
You know,
and the unfortunate thing, it's like the old Snapple cap. If you see it enough times, you get duped into believing that it has some credibility, and it does not.
Yeah, and I'm sure when we were younger children, at least I remember this in school, teacher lined up the whole class, and you whispered one thing in each other's ear, and by the time it came out at the end, you didn't recognize it.
Yep.
And so it's a tough problem. I'm not sure, you know, I'm not sure how much we can do, you know, other than to just, you know, do what we do and pass what we pass and reject what we reject and hope eventually the community sees some,
And perhaps
some good things out of what we do.
It ties back to one of the original pillars, which was enhancing community engagement. Maybe it's a part of that ongoing thing.
Yeah, absolutely, because all those people that you were talking about that showed up, what'd you say,
37 registrants last evening at the Citizens Academy.
They, in a way, become ambassadors to the community.
Every
And
single one of them can be. Thank you for that.
they each tell 10 of their friends, and eventually that word will get out there. It's still a big mountain to climb, though, so.
If I may too, I think it's incumbent upon us as the representatives of our residents to listen to their concerns, take their emails, take their public comments. And we can't fix everything, right? But we can at least be responsive, and we can at least tell them, you know, this is a person that you need to go talk to for that information. I think if anybody's ever read about Henry Ford, he didn't know everything. He was very admitted to that, but he would say, I know what button to press on my desk to call the right person. And so if we can at least direct the residents so they're not feeding off of some of that misinformation but going to the direct source, or if we're, you know, helping them and getting those answers for them, I think that's part of our job. And so if we continue to work in that vein and show a commitment to that, that'll overall it'll help that issue.
Well said. Very good. Good. Okay.
Okay. We heard a new priority in this pillar, which was create for residents to participate in town hall style meetings, evaluate options for both in-person and virtual formats.
So each of us has to make our own commitment for that. So we have to be with respect to Sunshine. I think everybody understands that. You all are familiar with my initiative, so it's underway. I applaud each of your individual efforts, but we do have to respect Sunshine with this project. So, okay.
This was one of my priorities. I do think it's important, like I just stated, to get out in front of the public and to answer questions. And I do think that there's a way that we can get kind of questions that are asked often, so that we're not getting one-offs, you know, things that maybe are not really responsive to, you know, one or two people, but more to larger parts, and especially in our district. And in talking to city staff, I think the idea was to vary the location based on the representative of the district that is going to engage in this, and maybe even post the questions that might be discussed so that those who want to participate in our community can do so. But I think this is just a way to kind of help that overall initiative of making sure we're getting the right information to our residents.
So, if we were to hold a town hall meeting, the community center, basically a free-for-all for the public to come in and ask whatever they wanted. If to be there, we're not violating any sunshine.
You're sitting in one at this very moment.
But this is a little more
No,
structured.
it would be promoted differently, sure.
But if you get into the town hall meeting
Okay.
type situation, where we say we did 4 a year, I'm just throwing this out here for conversation, and we picked a area, a topic for those town hall meetings, like one could be public safety, one could be economic growth, whichever. It would be a little bit more of a looser style than we're used to, but actually that might be quite good for us.
Okay.
So I have no objection to possibly planning
So
something like that. It certainly isn't going to cost us anything using our own
No.
community.
And I applaud the concept of collaboration. I jumped out, so obviously you all know that I'm, working on the Share with the Mayor, where anybody, any group can make an appointment, and I will go to them, whether it's a driveway, a living room, a sidewalk, a corner, it doesn't make any difference, or a place. And I only ask, as you suggested, that they pick, 3 topics, just because it can't be open-ended, so that also I could go prepared, or if you should, participate in your own way, be prepared to give them good, solid information to make it worthwhile for everybody. But to collaborate as a group for such an event, I'd be all in. Yeah, I would be in agreement with that. Sure.
Yeah, great idea, absolutely. And for any residents, you can find me out there on the pickleball courts whenever you want.
I think you've got some sort of focus on.
Yeah.
I think that's something we should look into.
Yes, thank you for the conversation and direction. We'll move on to our last pillar is sustainable environment and infrastructure. The priority here, develop a comprehensive cybersecurity plan to focus on safety and security of all infrastructure and critical functions. This was suggested to move to operations as the information is sensitive in nature. This was provided to you at your January 10th update, that it is a focus of our IT department.
Agreed.
Okay. Moving on to our next priority is modified. Collaborate with FPL and community partners to provide electric vehicle fast charging stations across multiple locations in the city. An objective here is explore ways to add revenues for street improvements, enterprise funds through user fees for EV charging stations.
I don't know whose priority this was, so I don't mean to step on anybody. The only thing I would ask is that I'd like staff to consider if this could become a check item in our, and I'm not trying to add to the red tape, but in our development order approval process. So if there is a commercial structure, a business, whatever being built, if that could become, I don't know about requirement, but it could become a checkbox in their, in the development process of a commercial construction.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
So if you're going to build, a commercial building that's going to have X number of parking spots, you got to put in X number of EV stations.
At whose expense? Their expense?
Not ours.
Not ours, right?
No,
But-
make no mistake, not ours.
But, so we tell them you need to put 4 of them in.
Yep.
And they're like, well, we only want to put 2 in because we don't see the demand that you're seeing. What I'm saying is that there may be the demand there. I don't want to,
I think there are standards now. So for example, they could tap into FPL, so perhaps they don't bear the whole cost because
Right.
FPL is the benefactor in all of this. And I think, 100 parking spots, I think there already are equations out there would denote X number of charging stations.
And as long as, I assume that it has to be economically feasible for them in the long run. That
Of
they're gonna
course.
get a slice of that pie.
Right.
From
We
FPL.
would never impose a losing business model on anybody. So this is for staff to consider as a possibility.
No, I think that's great, as long as, the economic demand is there, then actually it makes sense for them. You'd think they would do it without our direction.
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, if they were, you know, if they were presented.
We'll just
with
help them come to their senses.
Well, help them see that you can make a profit doing this, because that's what motivates, you know, everyone in the end. So in that case, I think it's a great idea. I'm still wondering, when are we gonna start putting a credit card on the ones we have out there?
Right.
Not to spoil any fun, but our light team, the leadership and training experience that's organized through Miss Bevan, they actually have this as a project, and they're very excited to present to you their findings on this priority, and it should be coming in May or June.
I'm excited for that because this was something that we specifically discussed, so I'm so happy to hear that that's coming, because as people are driving more electrical vehicles and our fuel tax revenues are going down, we need to figure out a way to compensate that. So this is something that I'm very happy to hear. It sounds like council being on board and that we're going to be seeing a presentation very soon.
Okay, great. Moving on to the next priority is conduct a solar feasibility study and expand the scope to include solar arrays, solar power retrofits for current and future facilities. And as indicated, this is marked complete because as indicated in your January 10th update, that we completed the solar feasibility study for the Southern Recreation Center, and we also incorporated it into the maintenance and operations complex.
I think, just a bullet point, I think in the future, as solar costs continue to be driven down, I think that future councils may have to reevaluate some of the opportunities that we have as a city to offset some of our grid energy, if you will, our consumables from the grid with some of our own sustainable energy. I don't think at that point is right now. Exactly, we're not at that point of convergence where the investment right now is something that would probably be palatable, but I think in the future, probably past my lifetime on this council, we'll have opportunities where the cities can a little bit more rapidly have a return on their investment.
And we will always be the free sunshine state of Florida.
Amen, that's why our power is cheap. Yeah, exactly right.
Okay, moving on to the next priority. This was also a legislative priority through a multifaceted approach, including TPO, collaboration with city lobbyists, and direct communications with our legislative team to encourage the inclusion of Phase 2 and Phase 3 of Old Kings Road widening in the FDOT 5-year work plan. And this was actually a legislative appropriations request, so it's in progress currently.
Okay, and Vice Mayor, this is probably the slide I was thinking about with regard to the debacle with homeowners insurance. I mean, this is our effort in Tallahassee, and obviously we wield a little bit of power at this point in time to bring it home to get that fixed for the future. So in my mind, that naturally falls within this particular slide.
Okay. Any other comments? All
I just
right.
have a question.
Sure.
When, and you might not know this, but if we could look into this, when should we expect an update from our lobbyist, who I think is a Southern group?
I'm gonna ask Jason if he knows when he's in direct communications with our.
Good morning again. We don't have a set time frame, but usually it's after the governor's period to sign bills is completed to make sure that we don't get out in front of some bills that don't make it all the way to the end, or appropriations that don't make it all the way to the end. So the session ends on May the 7th. The new fiscal year starts July 1st, so sometime between May the 7th and that wherever the end of that signing period is, we'll ask Laura Bomer to come and present her findings or her update to what occurred in the legislature.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
And I would go a step further. I would also say that at that presentation or shortly thereafter, I think it would be appropriate for this council to evaluate the performance of our lobbyist.
I agree with that 100%.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the last priority, develop a maintenance plan for the saltwater canals. This was heard to maintain on the priority list. Taylor Engineering is underway with their bathymetric survey, so we should have those results to City Council soon.
Okay, I do have a comment here, and it's a very few words, but when I think of the maintenance of the saltwater canals, in my mind, I also have to include the seawalls.
Okay?
So I would ask that that become a part of this. In other words, you can't, they're two different things because one involves private ownership and one is to be decided. And you can't plan for maintenance of one without consideration of the other. It's a full,
But,
yeah, go ahead.
but those seawalls are privately owned. So the maintenance falls on the homeowner.
Maybe, in
Maybe
other
it's
words,
an
there's a,
Right,
or,
right.
or there's a lot more, it's not just that, there's a lot more to it, there's a lot more discussion. What I want to make clear here, it's not just the saltwater canal. The saltwater canal does not exist without the seawalls and vice versa.
Made canals.
Correct. So
Obviously.
it's a city manager, help me here. It's a system, I'm not sure it's an ecosystem, there's some kind of a term. They live and die or thrive together.
Yeah, it's a marriage between the two.
Okay, a marriage between the two, okay.
Do we, that requires maintenance on your, or requires, there's places where there's no seawalls.
Correct.
Yeah, for a failing seawall, when it's brought to our attention, because we do not have the resources to patrol the waterways and look for those conditions. But if there is a failing seawall, obviously there's impacts to the system, not just from erosion, but just a lot of different variables. And that would, in some contexts, be an illicit discharge to city waterways, and that is in the Code of Ordinances.
Now, I know our sheriff's department is out with their cops doing patrols. I mean, that may be something we can tap into, like if you see a seawall that looks like it's,
take a
picture and let us know where it is. We can do that without spending any extra money as they do their patrols up and down through those canals. But I don't want to see us ever get to a point where we're repairing somebody's private property.
No, of course not.
Yeah,
No, that's for sure, and I wasn't going there. I just didn't want anyone to think that that the study that we're anxiously awaiting
Right.
is going to address just what you see below the water. It's like it's more than that.
Oh, I
That's
know,
all.
and that's
Okay.
why we're waiting for that study,
Right.
and then we'll have to figure out
Exactly,
how
and
to
I
go
think
from there.
I think the more detailed discussion and the financial impacts that accompany it, we would have to wait for the study to be available.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to our evaluation next steps. So we will be back to you on April 25th to review and further discussion of the draft priorities, and then adoption at the May 2nd business meeting. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
I would just like to congratulate you and thank you for the hard work to get to this point. And I especially want to thank my fellow city council members. I can't think that we could be any more collaborative in our thoughts and wishes to make Palm Coast the best it can be and a model for both the region and the state of Florida. So I thank you all for each one of.
Yes, Mayor, thank you for the conversation and discussion today, and thank you to our SAP team who works hard to put all of this information together for you. So we will see you at the end of April.
Thank you.
It's a tough act to follow, Mr. Coate.
I'm here to show you how we're going to spend lots of money.
Bad cop. Yeah.
Carl Cody, Director of Engineering Stormwater Department. So what you have here that we presented you today is our annual update to the 10-year capital improvement plan. And this is really high level. It kind of sets the vision of how we're identifying projects and what projects. High level, because we don't go in here and do budget projections. Some of the costs for projects are just placeholder dollar figures at this point in time to just have them identified in the 10-year plan. And some of them include, you know, our ask for either funding through DOT, legislative priorities. So this isn't to say that this is actually going to happen this way, because there's lots of unknowns in here. But this is more of saying, this is where we want to go in the future. Things may shift and move based on actual costs, based on when we get funding, or if we do get those grant dollars, you know, when they actually get funded through those grant dollars, and how development happens, how quick it happens, may push or slide items. So as we go through, we'll really get into some of how we're looking at each fund. We'll talk about some of the restrictions on those funds, and then we'll kind of give you an overview of some of the guidance to find those projects. So I know you just heard all about SAP. You know, a lot of what we do in the capital improvement plan, or the CIP as we call it, it relates directly to those council priorities, you know, whether it's sustainable infrastructure, whether it's safe and reliable services, or strong resilient economy, you know, it's providing the level of quality of service that the citizens expect and deserve in our community. So our first fund that we're going to talk about is our capital projects fund. And so there's a couple main points here that we hit on this particular fund. One is to focus on critical, urgent need projects. And, you know, that's dealing with our existing facilities. You know, we need AC replacements, we need to paint them, we need to replace carpet or the roof, or, you know, just keeping up what we have, as well as our IT infrastructure. So there's facilities and IT infrastructure. It's really maintaining what we got. Then maintain priority of the Maintenance Operations Center. That's you know, you heard that in the last SAP. That is our top priority project that's funded in this fund. There are other funds that play into this, in particular the utility and stormwater fund. Those enterprise funds play a big role in helping fund a portion of that work. But the design is underway. Phase 1 construction will be the fleet facility and associated site work. That was identified as the most needed element for that project. So that we expect to be in construction this next fiscal year, but that is maintaining that when we look at the funding and overall project list. Shift all park capacity projects to the fund. You know, this is just a recurring element where in the past we were funding a lot of projects from this fund to advance projects. So we wanted to say add parks, or we wanted to add projects, and we didn't have those impact fees in place. We were using these funds to pay for those, and we've shifted that and made it true to moving forward with those projects when the impact fees were available. And then this fund would pay the fair share of those impact fees, because impact fees don't fully pay for those new facilities, but it was helping to reallocate so we could identify and commit the revenue in this fund to the Maintenance Operations Center complex and focusing on maintaining our existing facilities. And then obviously maintain flexibility. So, you know, as we continue to seek grants, identify grants, you know, as market costs come, you know, may look at projects, whether we end up phasing them or shifting them. We need to be flexible in how we move forward with potential projects to adapt to changes in revenue and project costs. So where does this fund come from, and what are the restrictions? You know, this is the 0.5% of the 7% sales tax collected in Flagler County. It's committed for construction and improvement of public facilities. It's adopted by Flagler County ordinance, and it's distributed according to the state formula, where the city gets roughly 50% of the tax collected. Began in 1/1/2013, and it expires 12/31/2032. So this here is an overall summary of that 10-year plan. Kind of just like to summarize the types of projects. You can see we have park projects, rehab and renewal identified in here. We have path and trail projects, which is very minimal. We have some IT capital, and that we talked about was, maintaining that asset. Then we have other projects which don't fit into various categories. And then city facility projects, the bulk of that is the duration of this revenue. And then there's transfers, and a lot of that has to do with paying for the city's fair share in those impact fee projects. Any questions on this particular fund before we move on?
I do. You use the formulation you mentioned in the definition, small county. Would you know where we stand in that listing? In other words, are we close to becoming something other than a small county?
I don't think it's small. That may be a question for Helena.
Good answer. All I'm really getting at, are we getting close to becoming something different for this calculation?
So I don't believe so. This is 1990-something. The city was determined to be, the county was determined to be a small county, and it continues as far as I'm.
Because I know the county used to be considered a rural county. That has changed in the last couple of years, which has affected the county's ability to seek certain types of funding or whatever. So it must be based on population. So it would be interesting.
It was 50,000, the population
What
at
is
the
it?
time. There was a 50,000 population cap at the time.
Right,
But
so
I
it
don't
would be,
think
it would be
we're
interesting to me to know, is there a next level of that and what that population might be? I don't need to know it now, but it would be interesting to know if that, since we're doing a comprehensive plan out to 2035, we'll have population forecasts. So I'd like to know if we get to a different level, I guess, okay?
Yep.
Thank you.
And in respect to that, we have a 0.5% tax, and there's an additional 0.5% that could be assessed by the county on top of this. So it could be tapped by the county, where the city would benefit from. So we talked about the summary. Recreation Impact Fee Fund. So the strategy in this one is the project priorities to be evaluated at completion of the countywide recreation master plan. So that's currently underway, as a countywide plan. We do have some ongoing projects, some ongoing grants. So when we look at the summary, we'll touch upon that. But we really are focusing on grant funded and partnership projects and needs due to growth. So you can see we identified some projects, the Long Creek Nature Preserve, where we have a grant for doing some boardwalk and overlooks. Waterfront Park, that's currently under construction, and we were here to continue application those improvements. The Southern Recreation Center and the Lehigh Trailhead at Belterre. Grand Swamp Trail is one we're seeking DOT funding on. They had funded an initial phase. We still have more to go. Neighborhoods Park has been for citizens for several years to add in these additional neighborhood parks. Focus on critical needs and safety and satisfy obligations. So we know a critical need is expanded parking at the community center and Indian Trail Sports Complex. And then our Long Creek Nature Preserve remaining build out was a commitment that the city has due to the grants we received for the purchase of the property there. And then include all park capacity projects in the Park Impact Fee Fund, so we've already covered that bullet point. The Recreation Impact Fee Fund, in fiscal year 20, a rate study was performed, and there's an update completed. There's an annual increase per the Construction Cost Index as published by the Engineering News Record in June of each year. The current rate is $1,769.15. It's restricted to growth-related projects only. Projects that add new capacity cannot be used for existing system deficiencies or maintenance of our existing facilities. As well, the impact fee can only cover roughly 70% of the costs associated with growth-related projects. So we need to find that 30% or so balance from other funding sources. We currently typically use our capital improvement fund, or if it's in the CRA district, we sometimes use those CRA dollars, or if we have grants, we use the grant dollars. So it's some other funding source.
So if I could just comment here for the residents. I think we all get a question frequently about why monies are spent here as opposed to there. And this is a very complex subject, but you know, our hands are tied in many of these funds. You can't arbitrarily or make a decision suddenly to move monies from one of these buckets to another. It's not permissible by law. And we'll say that a bunch more times, but that's a fact. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it.
Correct, and these also have that time limit where you're supposed to expend those funds after a certain period of time from collecting them as well. This is our summary of projects. You can see our resource-based parks in here, our neighborhood parks, our centers, and then the special use facilities. And you can see that the further out years are blank, you know, because I indicated that as we update the park countywide master plan, then we'll be able to revisit the project priorities and provide an update as to what projects and when those should occur.
Carl, I'm sorry, if I could just, can you give me a quickie explanation on if we go from fiscal year 25 to 26, we're jumping, just give me a rationale there in your projection on the bottom line.
Yeah, it's really the fund balance is based on the revenue available. I think the big jump is, I think in 25 we're doing design of 2 neighborhood parks, and then in 26 we'd be constructing them.
Okay.
So we'd advance them if the revenues speed up. You know, again, this is very high level, and you know, we haven't designed the parks yet. We don't have real dollars
No,
yet.
and I assume it ties back somehow, some way to a population forecast as well.
Yeah, we look at building permit activity, we make adjustments, we do forecasting. So when we do the 5-year plan, we'll really be looking at those funds. So that will be much more fine-tuned when we come back with the 5-year
So
plan.
that I could look at it more as a placeholder right now, and
Correct.
then you'll fine-tune it, okay.
It's a project in the 10-year plan. Timing is kind of not completely true here because a lot of that fine-tuning with revenues.
I'm just trying to help the vice mayor not fall off his chair, okay?
Transportation Impact Fee Fund, this is another impact fee funded, restricted fund. Grant funded projects, we do have our Whiteview Safety Improvement Project in here. We continue to pursue grant funding for Oak Kings Road widening, phase 2 and 3, Belterre safety improvements, Oak Kings Road extension, construction, Matanzas Woods widening design. So these are all on the FDOT TPO project list. Some of them are ranked fairly high. These are some legislative priorities as well. So these are all items where we continue to get funding to help offset the costs of those. We do also in this fund do transportation system improvements. You know, we have the transportation access to the west feasibility study. So this is examining, you know, not just Matanzas, but how are we looking at, you know, you guys, you know, vision that whole master plan. You know, so we need to really look at that whole transportation network and how that's going to work and function. Matanzas Woods extension, you know, is a legislative priority. Citation Boulevard extension, that was a partnership, you know, we did with the developer to get that access through there and eliminate a fire station, and that is moving forward. So the restrictions on this are similar to the Recreation Impact Fee Fund. You know, in 2018 is when we did a study for this fee. It's adjusted annually on January 1st per city review of the August DOT Transportation Cost Report, construction cost inflation factor. Currently a rate study is being updated, completed this fiscal year. It's restricted to growth-related projects. Projects that are adding new capacity cannot be used for existing deficiencies or maintenance, you know, such as resurfacing, those sorts of things. You know, it'd be nice if we could, but it cannot be. It's only for adding turn lanes, adding travel lanes, you know, adding capacity.
So, and our economists today made it clear that the inflationary forecast is going to outpace your impact fee.
Right. Yeah, this and factors. Transportation Impact Fee Fund summary. You can see some of the projected grants as legislative funding we have in there is quite high. You know, none of those are commitments yet. There are some that are, but a lot of them are just requests. So you can see we're showing a lot of projected expenses in this fund, but it's all tied back to if and when we get that grant funding. So, Fire Impact Fee Fund, we continue to evaluate response times and development of station locations and priorities. We implemented a fiscal year 20 impact fee study update was done. We identified constructing new stations to meet response times and level of service, Fire Station 26 and 22, as well as mini fire station on Whiteview. We identify operational costs associated with each new facility as we are planning and implementing those over the program plan period. And additional funding is necessary in order to meet timing of new facilities. So there was a general fund repayment from the CRA that we added into this fund to help with offsetting the costs of these stations. Restrictions, same thing. There's an annual update in June of each year from the Construction Cost Index. Current rate is $420.52 per new dwelling unit and 68 cents per square foot for non-residential new development. Again, it's restricted to growth. New capacity can't be used for maintaining or renovating or rehabbing existing systems or facilities. And this is the summary. Again, I think we have some legislative asks in here for fire stations as well. We have identified potential source of using those American Rescue Funds also to assist. So all those will be evaluated and honed out over the next several months, and the timing of that and looking at revenue projections will outlay when and how these projects are going to move forward, but at least we're underway with the design of 22 and 26 at this time and the evaluation of the existing 22. Our Streets Improvement Fund. So, the focus is on safety and maintenance projects. We continue the implementation of the Continuous Streetlight Master Plan. We continue to, optimize and look at our traffic signal operations to enhance that network. We continue our bridge rehabilitation program to stay ahead of any deterioration so we don't get into any major rehab projects. We have our rehabilitation renewal of existing traffic signals. We have a lot of now older span wires, but we have added a lot of signals over the last 20 years, and as they get aged, they're going to need a lot of maintenance costs, and that's something that's going to have a big impact on this particular budget over the next 10 years. And then safety improvements, always at a forefront of how we're going to make it safer, not only for pedestrians, but vehicular users, for all users of the roadway network. Our pavement management program, you can see in red, we continue to reiterate that, the funding source for resurfacing, went away many years ago, and this fund cannot maintain the need for resurfacing the roadways, in terms of what they need, needs to be at. So we'll be coming back to you with a special presentation specifically only on the pavement management program, identifying the needs. We know costs have gone up 25% just in the last year. There's a lot of costs out there. We knew we were short before. We're not getting any better. We're going to be even shorter, based on the increase in costs that we've seen.
So you're asking us to keep a placeholder in our conservative approach to the budget. That's a place that we're going to have to fill, which is going to come from someplace else in order to, not. So, that's one of those things that, when you talk about wants and needs, okay, this, in my opinion, is a need, because the consequences, as I think Carl has told us in the past, is the expense to this could accelerate dramatically if you were to kick it down the road a little bit.
This is an absolute must-have, and we're going to have to sacrifice.
It's
other
going to
things.
cost something else.
But
Okay, that's all I'm
absolutely.
saying.
But you gotta have roads, you gotta have police, you gotta have fire, you gotta have EMTs,
Okay.
you gotta have water. You know, there's some essentials here, and that's where our focus really needs to be. We can't, as you said, kick this can down the road any further.
Pun intended, right?
No pun intended.
Gotcha.
So, because we won't down, right?
And we currently defer items in this fund so we can at least fund or move as much funding to our pavement resurfacing program now. So, you heard about our entry neighborhood signs. We only do it if it's part of a project. At this point in time, we don't fund that program. The parkway beautification, again, we only do it if it's part of a project, roadway project. And sidewalk, bike paths, and pedestrian accommodations have really kind of been put on hold as well. So we can try and stay ahead as much as we can of the resurfacing, so we're not getting as behind as we could. It's not much, but every little bit helps.
May I ask a couple questions on this slide specifically? These additional funding sources, are there things that we could be doing that we haven't done that would help in this regard?
Well, I'll bring up this next slide. So we've done some. You can see there's two portions of revenue in here. And in our state revenue sharing, we're only required to put 22.64% of these funds into street maintenance, but we actually exceed that and put in 45% of those funds from the state. So we did an increase a couple of years ago to try and increase the revenues in this fund to help. So that's one thing we've done.
Is it fair to say that if we did, and I don't know, because again, Ms. Alves, this is more your world than mine, if we were to impose a user fee for the charging stations, would that go into this fund, or would it go into a different fund?
I think that's something will have to be determined as we move forward with that study on what would be the use of the funds. It would be determined by City Council. You can certainly apply it to the pavement program if that was a decision of council.
Okay, and then the other question I had was, these deferred items, the cost for these things, are they more in the cost for labor or the cost for materials, or is it about 50-50? And I ask because I think that we could perhaps work with our sheriff's office, if we're not already doing so, with regards to work release, to lessen labor costs, if these are still things that we value as citizens with regards to beautification of our city.
These are for like new construction items. We have in the past, our neighborhood signs, built them with our special works crew over at Public Works. So then there was only becoming material costs. So that really cut the cost down in half.
I would like to see us explore that some more, because I think that it's good for the community, and it's also good for some of our rehabilitating men and women in those facilities.
Yeah, there still is a lot of cost associated, even if we got free labor, because they're new construction.
Mm-hmm.
So, to build a sidewalk is very expensive. The labor is more minimal at this point. And we do, again, with sidewalks, we do a lot in-house with our public works staff as well. We've done many projects over the years. We do have our neighborhood sign at East Hampton. We just saw those roadway turn lane improvements there, and we had that old sign that was kind of out of, in the way, that got impacted. So we will be refreshing that sign, and we hope to work with Public Works to do that refresh on that particular sign.
Okay, thank you.
So getting on the restrictions, we have two revenue sources, a local option fuel tax. So it's currently 6 cents per gallon on fuel purchased in Flagler County. And then it's distributed per interlocal agreement based on road miles. It's restricted for transportation expenses. And then the state revenue sharing that we spoke of a few minutes ago, it's a portion of the state sales tax and use tax collections and 1 cent municipal fuel tax. And there's the percent proration that's applied to this fund.
So is it naive to think that if we have more gas stations, we'll sell more gas and we'll generate more fuel tax?
we gotta, we haven't seen that, even with all the new gas stations that, say have gone up on 100, the couple of racetracks, the Wawa. The revenue you can see has been fairly flat. Vehicles are more fuel efficient, or when gas is too high, people don't drive as much. So we haven't seen much increase in those revenues in this fund.
Through the pandemic period.
Well, I think since over the past 20 years, it's been fairly flat.
The sale of, the number of gallons of gasoline sold over the last 20 years has been flat.
Well,
I have a problem
I
with
say
that.
a small increase. It doesn't increase like all the other funds increase per the construction cost index or the sales tax dollars spent. This is a
Just
much
from a-
slower climb than any of the other revenue sources.
I guess I would challenge our economic development folks to help me understand why a business would jump into a business model that wasn't growing. So it's not a fair question for you, but I'll explore that on my own. Okay. I think that's just unusual that it would be flat.
We would hope it would turn out that way, but it's not always the case. That people would purchase gas here. If you make it more convenient for them, now they're not filling up in Volusia or somewhere else when they travel, that they fill up before they jump on the
No,
highway.
understood. But again, I question the business, we're talking about bringing businesses into the community, bringing a business model that isn't going to be successful. And those folks are pretty good at determining that they'll be successful. So I'll just need to better understand that line of numbers. I'll work on it.
Yeah, and really what's happening here, construction or the cost of the projects are outpacing the revenue increase.
Understood.
I guess that's the point I was trying to get across. So you can see that the various expenditure line items in here. We have some small dollars for safety improvements, beautification, street lighting, kind of dies off in 27 where we complete that implementation program. We have bridge rehabs, kind of a placeholder, because as we receive our DOT inspections, we identify projects. Our traffic signal projects, again, it's kind of a placeholder as we continue to evaluate those on an annual basis. And the biggest, expense is our street rehab program, which really uses the majority of, close to most of the funds that are received. And then, but it's nowhere near the funding needed to maintain the roadways at the current level. So community redevelopment area fund strategy. So this is the town center CRA. It's repayment of debt service and utility fund incentive program, and develop a long-range maintenance and operation plan for striping, paving, looking to see how we may be able to incorporate that. It's a tax increment restricted to development within the CRA. Again, you can see that the bulk of the funds go to, debt service or transfers. Some of those transfers are for projects, and some of them is for that incentive program that was put in place a couple of years ago for the payback of those impact fees.
And I'm sorry, just help me. Those monies can be used for what purpose?
They have to be used within the CRA. There's a CRA plan that identified projects within the CRA, and it can be used on those particular items.
The CRA needed to be widened. Is that legitimate funding?
We have in the CRA currently, in the current agreement, the transportation impact fees collected in the CRA are staying within the CRA. So there's a pot of transportation impact fee funds that are collected that would be spent on a capacity improvement project within town center. So we would more than likely use those set aside transportation impact fee funds for that purpose.
Okay.
And that covers all the funds for the 10-year CIP, with the exception of stormwater and utility that we usually go over when we talk about those funds specifically, because it impacts the overall budget for those.
Questions from City Council? I mean, it's pretty comprehensive. You got to digest those numbers. The only thing I always get concerned about is that, so many of the projects that add up to those numbers have been in play for, some of them for a very long time. It's not, you're not presenting us today with a new schedule of projects. You're updating us on projects that are either underway or have been planned in the past to be underway at some point, either today or in the future.
Correct, yeah, usually like our transportation projects is, they call it a 10-year plan, so to go through a planning study, to then go through, design, right-of-way acquisition, then to move forward with construction funding, so like properties, Holland Park was, a 10-year, and we did a master plan in 2008, and we just finished the improvements, a couple years ago, so a lot, like you're saying, a lot the project. So a lot of these have been in the works and are ongoing.
And not to beat a dead horse, but now that we are number one in our MSA, we should extract more from our membership in our Flagler TPO. So we should leverage that so that we have more asks and get more money from that, more priorities set forward to DOT, so we enjoy the benefit of that in the future. So I will take that on personally as a responsibility and hopefully work through city manager to make that happen. Thank you for your presentation. That concludes the presentations for this morning, and thankfully it's still this morning. So that brings us to item number F on the agenda, which is public participation. So I would invite any members of the public that would like to comment on any items that were not previously discussed on today's agenda. Yes, sir.
Great presentations, I just want to say that. Safety is an issue over on Florida Park Drive. Just the other day I was out doing some yard work, and a blue car come running up fast behind another car, a white car, and evidently they thought it was going too slow, so they decided they were going to pass. And what happened, they ended up drag racing down Florida Park. See it a lot of times. Just letting you know that it's still a problem. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Well, that was quite a representation we had
Just
today.
for our record, just say your name just so that we have it for the record.
Chantal Proninger. That warms my heart to hear such an optimistic financial report. And I appreciate that you're willing to look at the priorities as far as the budget goes, but some people might have got 2 or 3 jobs to survive, or government help, which could give the illusion that more jobs are filled or created than reality. And if you look at the jobs in Palm Coast, what do you have? You work in a store or you work in a medical. May I suggest that making it more profitable, like lower taxes for companies who would like to start businesses here. I hear companies would like to come, but there's too much tax. We should not have to go north or south for our needs. And we need more medical services, more stores, and infrastructure that can absorb the growth as more and more people are coming. We should not have to wait a month or 2 to see a doctor. We also need residential property taxes decreased. And some who have lived here for a long time, they say that taxes are lower than the rest of us who came afterwards. And I ask you a question, if they can have lower taxes, why not the rest of us too? And also, please be careful how you use our tax money. There was something that was said about building a cooperative and trusting relationship between the city and the community. And when you passed your salary increased against popular opinion, you lost the trust of the community, but you can still vote to reverse it. You've got to remove the nail in the coffin to regain the trust. Maintenance projects, that include the swales. That's one question. And also I agree that 35 miles per hour in residential areas with no sidewalks need to be rethought as people give themselves 5, 10 mile per hour extra clearance. Sometimes when I leave the house early in the morning, I can barely see those who walk their dogs. We don't have enough street lights. Could we look into street lights that are solar, so that you don't have a cost that comes and going all the time? And also, we have no public transportation at all. I've never lived in a city like that. As far as, can I finish my sentence? As far as gas tax for the car, I mean, I'm probably like everybody else. We get the gas the cheapest we can. So if you increase the gas tax, people are going to go out of the city to get the gas. If you decrease it, it will bring people from outside to get it. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public that would like to address City Council today? Seeing no one come forward, I will close public comment, and I will ask City Council members, any final comments for today?
No final comments except good meeting, guys.
Yes, I will second that. I want to thank our staff for all of the efforts already put into SAP, and for Denise for kind of nurturing that project, I think kind of a long time ago, and for keeping it going. Also, thank you to Carl Cody for his presentation. I'm encouraged by our discussion on the dais today, and look forward to implementing a lot of our priorities while keeping in mind conservative expenditures of our residents' tax dollars.
Thank you.
I have no comments.
I agree.
Again, and I could only say thank you. Thank you to staff, thank you to the public, and thank you to my fellow council members. City Manager, any final comments for today?
Well, I would say welcome back to our city manager.
Welcome
too.
back,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the comments on the strategic action plan process and how important that is for us to have that, clear line of sight of how we move forward and bring the deliverables back to you, so we're accountable for what you expect of our staff.
Very good, thank you for that. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?
Yeah, I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.